Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about the LFO capability on the MIDI Hub. LFOs allow you to add change and dynamic movement to your music by adjusting synthesizer parameters automatically. An LFO is like turning a knob automatically for you. The CC-LFO module generates an LFO on a given CC value, a different control change value, at the resolution and rate that you specify. By default, it creates the CC mapping on channel 1. And I've set the note codes to listen on control change 1. Straight away you see the illumination of the activity window corresponds to the value of this waveform. So this is a sine wave going from 0 to a max of 64 and back down again to 0. Now let's look at the various parameters that the LFO module has. The most obvious one is the rate. This is currently 1 Hz, which means over a course of 1 second the waveform begins and ends. I could slow it down by setting it to 0.5 Hz, and now you see that the window is illuminating more slowly. What does the resolution mean? At the lowest resolution, you'll see that the window is illuminating in a more stepwise fashion, as the LFO is generating fewer values for each cycle. If I increase it up to the highest value, it illuminates in a smoother fashion. Let's see the impact of this on the mix value on the digitone. So we place another LFO here. I know that CC20 is the mix value for the digitone, and I'm going to send that to MIDI A. Straight away you can see the XY value is oscillating back and forth to each extreme. If I set the rate to 0.5 Hz, it goes slower. If I reduce the resolution, you see it's moving in a more jerky fashion. And if I increase the resolution, it's moving in a smoother fashion. You can adjust the depth of the modulation here, and the waveform at the bottom of the screen shows you what that looks like. Halfway around the center point, and of course we can reduce it even further and oscillate far smaller amounts. There are different waveforms available. We can go for a sawtooth up, so the waveform goes from left to right as it ramps up and then goes back to 0. Sawtooth down, goes the other direction. Square wave, which simply goes on and off. PWM stands for pulse width modulation and lets you set the percentage of time the square wave is on and off. At 50%, it means the square wave is on and off for the same amount of time. If you set it to 25%, you're getting shorter pulses. So it's off, on, off, on. Triangle is a triangle waveform, and noise is very useful if you want to just add random noise to modulation. And I'll show later how you can use this to add modulation noise on top of an existing modulation. We can also modulate the harmonics by running another parallel pipe. So we'll do a CC-LFO, and I know the CC value for harmonics is 17. I'll increase the resolution here and decrease the rate. And we'll set this to a triangle waveform and send this to MIDI A. And now you see the harmonics also being modulated. In the MIDI Hub, it's possible to use an LFO to modify the behavior of another LFO. For example, say we want to add a little bit of noise to the modulation of the harmonics value on this synth patch. In this case, I'll start with an LFO set to CC17. I'll set the resolution to 64, the rate to 0.4. And then I'm going to add another LFO in sequence with that, and it is also going to be set to the same CC value, sync to the BPM, and I'm going to set this to noise with a much smaller depth, and then I'm going to channel remap that to channel 2 because it's on track 2, and then that goes out MIDI A. We now see that the harmonics, they have some randomness added, but it's not quite behaving the way I want. And why is this? In this mode value here, you can choose whether the second LFO is free running, actively modified, or passively modified. So I'm going to set this to passively modified so that every time a new value arrives at the input of this LFO pipe, it adds the little amount of noise that I've configured down here using this shallow depth. Now if we look at the harmonics value, you can see that it's changing from end to end, but as it's doing, it's changing with random noise added in. That adds a very nice glitchy effect. The last thing I want to show you is how to use one LFO to modulate the value of another LFO. To do this, we have to use a MIDI loopback trick. What I've done is connected a MIDI cable from output C to input A. Any MIDI that's sent by the MIDI hub from this output will get picked up on its input. MIDI hub lets you map parameters on control modules to external values. Here the LFO is modulating the mix value on the digitom. And what I'd like to do is adjust the depth of that modulation so it's modulating less and more over time. First of all, I'm going to just place another LFO here. And it doesn't really matter what CC value it's set to because the MIDI hub auto learns that as we map it. I'm going to change the resolution. I'm going to set it to a slightly slower rate so that we can see it. The next thing I'm going to do is use a rescale module. And a rescale module allows me to scale the input values to a range of output values. In this case, I'm going to scale control changes from 0 to 127, which is the full range, to just a much smaller range. Finally, I'm going to output that from MIDI C. Now, we have to go into this LFO, and if I hit map, it will automatically learn the input coming in on this, which you see if I click this triangle is on MIDI A, channel 1, CC3. And as you can see from the LFO waveform here, the depth of the modulation is being modulated by the second LFO, which of course is reflected on the screen as well. If I go in here and change the rate of this, I could speed it up. We go back to this LFO, you can see now the depth of the modulation is changing much more dramatically. You'll also notice a little green icon up on the corner of this LFO module, and that indicates that it's been mapped to an external controller. And if you want to just remove that mapping, you can click Unmap. And now it's gone. I hope you found this tutorial useful and learned something about using LFOs on the MIDI hub. Don't forget to leave me some comments down below with any of your questions, and hit subscribe because I'm going to be making more tutorial videos on MIDI hub. Thanks for watching.